3 weeks ago, a team of Cambridge archaeology students excavating a pit in Wandlebury Country Park just outside Cambridge pulled a skeleton out of the ground. The story ran in Live Science in February 2026. On its own, nothing unusual. Viking Age burial, 9th century, 10 individuals, some dismembered. Standard enough. But buried in paragraph 7 of that report was a single sentence that stopped me. One of the men, aged 17 to 24, stood approximately 6 feet 5 inches tall. The researchers noted this made him, quote, a massive height for the time. The explanation offered? A probable pituitary tumor. Case closed. Next paragraph. I want to sit with that explanation for a moment, because that is the exact same explanation that has been applied with remarkable consistency to every anomalous skeletal find documented across the 19th and early 20th centuries. Pituitary tumor, gigantism, move on. I am not here to tell you that the Cambridge skeleton belonged to a 12-foot guardian of a lost civilization. I am here to ask a more precise question. Why does the reflex explanation always arrive before the measurements have been fully published? Why does the institutional framing precede the data? In 2025, archaeologists announced 30 significant finds across 4 continents, untouched Etruscan tombs, an intact Saka warrior burial in Kazakhstan, the tomb of Thutmose III in the Valley of the Kings, the first pharaonic tomb found there since Tutankhamun. Each of these generated serious, sustained coverage, peer-reviewed papers, follow-up expeditions. And yet, when proportionally anomalous human remains surface, not in fringe publications, not on conspiracy forums, but in documented excavation records from the 1820s through the 1880s, the follow-up is consistently absent. The coverage ends. The specimens disappear from institutional records. The silence is not random. Silence at this scale has a structure. Let me be precise about what the official position actually claims. The Smithsonian Institution's Human Origins Program, whose team member, Brianna Pobiner, addressed giant skeleton claims as recently as December 2024, maintains that every reported case of anomalously large remains in 19th century American excavations falls into one of 3 categories: misidentified animal bones, deliberate hoaxes, or pathological human gigantism. That position is not unreasonable as a starting point. What makes it extraordinary is that it functions as an end point. No case has ever been formally reopened. No specimen has ever been subjected to the modern osteological analysis that would definitively resolve the question. The category is assigned and the file closes. Here is why the pathology explanation does not survive contact with the source material. In 2024, researcher Nicholas Landel applied modern mathematical formulas to a pre-Columbian skeleton that had been claimed in a Travel Channel documentary to stand 7 feet tall. His analysis, which is exactly the kind of rigorous review that should be standard, found the individual was actually significantly shorter. This is how the process should work: claim, measurement, correction, transparent methodology. Apply that same standard to the Missouri find of September 1883. The St. Louis Republican documented a femur of 29 inches. The Trotter-Glesser stature reconstruction formula, the same formula used in modern forensic anthropology, applied to that measurement produces a minimum stature of 93 inches, nearly 8 feet. And that is the conservative figure, using the lowest range multiplier for a large-framed male skeleton. Now apply the pathological gigantism profile. The National Geographic published the first confirmed ancient skeleton with gigantism in 2012, a Roman male from Fidenae, standing 6 feet 8 inches. His bones showed the diagnostic markers: asymmetric growth, porous cortical structure, irregular joint surfaces. The documentation was meticulous. That case went through peer review, physical examination, and radiological analysis before the label was assigned. The 1883 Missouri specimens were described by attending physicians, not journalists, physicians, as bones of, quote, perfect proportionality, symmetrical, dense, no deformity recorded. Either those physicians were systematically incompetent across dozens of independent cases in multiple states, or the pathology explanation was applied after the fact to close a question that had not been properly examined. They were not simply found, they were methodically removed from institutions, leaving empty catalog numbers behind. I want to speak in measurements now, not impressions, because the numbers are where the official position becomes untenable. Missouri, September 1883. Workers laying a warehouse foundation in Gascogne County broke into a burial chamber at approximately 10 feet depth. The St. Louis Republican, September 12, 1883, shoulder span of approximately 35 inches, femur 29 inches, tibia 24 inches. Using the Trotter-Gleiser formula, the modern forensic standard, a 29-inch femur produces a stature reconstruction of 93 inches at minimum. That is with the conservative coefficient. The proportional reconstruction, accounting for the documented shoulder span, pushes the figure well past 100 inches. Tennessee, 1845, Williamson County. 5 skeletons recovered during road construction. A witness whose written testimony survives in the Nashville archive recorded skull circumference at 24 inches. The modern adult male average is 22 inches. Cranial volume scales as the cube of linear dimension. A 9% increase in circumference corresponds to a 30% increase in internal volume. This is not a rounding error. This is a categorically different skull. Iowa, 1856, Clayton County. The burial chamber contained stone tools alongside the remains. A flint chopper described as weighing approximately 15 pounds. A modern equivalent tool weighs between 10 ounces and 2 pounds. That is a 7-to-1 ratio at minimum. These are not decorative objects. These are working tools, worn from use according to the original description, scaled to hands that were not our hands. And here is what 2025 archaeology gave us without meaning to. The untouched 2,500-year-old Saka warrior burial in Kazakhstan's Oktogay district, documented this year, contained a skeleton with a bronze sword still in hand. The weapon was sized to the individual. Weapon-to-body scaling is consistent and documented across cultures. A sword sized to a 7-foot warrior is not the same sword sized to a 5'10" warrior. The stone chopper from Iowa follows the same principle. In that grainy albumin photograph from 1883, a Missouri construction worker holds the femur horizontally with both hands. The bone extends from his left shoulder to his right. His arm span, visible in the image, is approximately 68 inches. The bone exceeds it. Once you see that ratio, you cannot explain it away with a pituitary tumor. This is where the scale of what we are discussing becomes impossible to rationalize as coincidence. Because if this were a single regional story, you could construct a plausible local explanation, a hoax, a misidentification, a peculiar community mythology. But the pattern is not regional. Consider what 2024 and 2025 archaeology has demonstrated about global connectivity in the ancient world. LiDAR scanning revealed a complete medieval city, Tugunblock, along the Silk Road in Uzbekistan, an urban center that was simply not in our historical records until a plane flew over it with the right equipment. DNA analysis of Bronze Age remains confirmed trade networks spanning thousands of miles. The newly detected branch of the Nile, now dried, carried the stone to build Giza, a logistics operation at a scale we had systematically underestimated. The ancient world was more connected, more organized, and more technically capable than the academic consensus of 20 years ago acknowledged. That baseline matters for what comes next. California, 1833. Spanish missionaries near what would become San Francisco documented massive remains in coastal dunes. Their account entered the archive of Mission Dolores. London, 1863. During the construction of Bazalgette's sewage system, workers encountered burials at depths of 20 to 30 feet below the Victorian city surface. Chief engineer's records note non-standard remains transferred to the British Museum. The British Museum archive for that period contains no corresponding acquisition record. St. Petersburg, 1820s. Auguste de Montferrand, the architect of St. Isaac's Cathedral, noted in his personal records, not in any official report, in his personal notes, that bones of excessive size were encountered at foundation depth and forwarded to a learned society. No society, no record. Melbourne, March 14, 1876. The Melbourne Argus described remains belonging to a being considerably larger than the tallest man now living. 3 paragraphs, no follow-up in any subsequent edition. These 4 events occurred across 4 continents within a 50-year window, without the telegraph as a mass tool, without the transatlantic cable, without coordinated scientific institutions of the kind that now exist. The Victorian postal system between London and Melbourne required 4 months per letter. I will ask the question directly. How do hundreds of workers across 4 continents independently fabricate the same specific anomaly, documented in contemporaneous local records, have it witnessed by local physicians, and then have it vanish from every institutional collection it was transferred to? The coordination required for a hoax at this scale would be more extraordinary than the find itself. These beings were not anomalies scattered across history. They were inherited, not invented, and what was inherited was being systematically removed. Let us examine the mechanism, because what I am describing is not a single decision by a single institution, it is a system. And systems leave structural evidence even when their outputs are erasure. The first instrument is fire. Between 1870 and 1911, the Chicago Historical Society's main library burned, 1871. Large portions of San Francisco's municipal archives were destroyed, 1906. Sections of the California State Archive followed hours later in the same event. Multiple Smithsonian Bureau collections were affected across several incidents in the same period. Each of these fires occurred within years of the institutions receiving anthropological transfers from field collections gathered after 1850. In 2025, archaeologists working in Pompeii announced the discovery of an intact banquet room with paintings depicting initiation rituals, paintings that had survived nearly 2,000 years because the vault above them held. The frescoes survived because no one chose to open that vault. Conversely, paper archives in wooden buildings in the American Midwest burned with a regularity that targeted precisely the era and the content in question. Fire is indiscriminate, but the pattern of what survives and what does not is not random. The second instrument is credibility management. In December 2024, the Smithsonian's Brianna Pobiner publicly addressed the giant skeleton question on the record. The institutional position was clear: hoax or misidentification, no exceptions, no case deserving re-examination. This is not presented as a provisional conclusion pending further review. It is presented as settled science. The file is closed by declaration. not by evidence. Compare this to how the same institution handled the 2024 discovery of 12 ancient skeletons beneath the treasury at Petra. That find generated immediate peer review, follow-up funding commitments, and statements about the priceless nature of the discovery. The asymmetry in institutional response between finds that fit the accepted framework and finds that do not is not subtle. The third instrument is the orphan train system. Between 1854 and 1929, between 150,000 and 250,000 children were relocated from East Coast urban centers to western and southern states. Officially, charitable redistribution, structurally, a complete severance of family lineage. Children arrived without documents, without right of return, with new names. A person who does not know who their grandparents were cannot access what their grandparents witnessed. Generational memory does not survive institutional relocation at scale. The fourth instrument is the licensing of expertise. In the 1870s through 1890s, professional licensing systems for physicians, engineers, archivists, and educators became standard across the Western world. The side effect, likely unintentional in most cases, useful in all of them, was the creation of a gatekeeper class for the interpretation of physical evidence. Only a licensed specialist may authoritatively describe what a bone means, and the licensed specialist has been trained within a framework that already contains the correct answers. In early 2026, we have better tools than at any previous point in history for analyzing physical remains. Ancient DNA sequencing, micro-CT scanning, isotopic analysis that can reconstruct diet, migration, and growth patterns from a single tooth. None of these tools have been applied to the 1883 Missouri specimens, because the specimens are gone, and the institutions that received them have no record of their arrival. We are technological orphans on the ruins of a masterwork, and we were not told we were orphans. Let me bring this together. Between 1820 and 1890, on 4 continents, proportional human remains were documented at dimensions 1.5 to 2 times those of modern humans. The documentation is not fringe material. It is newspaper record, physician testimony, engineering archive, private correspondence. Not a single primary source from that era suggests hoax. All subsequent official dismissals, pathology or fabrication, have been applied without the physical examination that would make them authoritative. Every specimen transferred to an institutional collection in that period has since been lost, destroyed, or documented as missing from arrival. The Smithsonian, the British Museum, the Vatican all acknowledge thousands of standard finds from the same era and insist their collections are substantially complete. The anomalous finds are, uniformly, the ones that did not survive. In 2025 alone, archaeology gave us a pharaoh's intact tomb, a Viking mass grave, a medieval Silk Road city, a 43,000-year-old Neanderthal fingerprint, and the world's oldest mummies. Each of these generated sustained institutional follow-through. Each is now in the public record with full provenance. The contrast is not about resources or capability. It is about selection. Some questions are followed, others are not. We live in a world scaled to measurements that are not ours. Doorways 15 feet high in public buildings we call neoclassical. Street grids in cities laid out to accommodate traffic densities that 19th century horses and carriages could not have produced. Underground infrastructure in London, in Paris, in St. Petersburg, built with hydraulic engineering precision that the official historical record attributes to an era without the theoretical framework for it. None of this was invented in the 19th century. It was found, adapted, renamed, inherited, not invented. The Smithsonian addressed giant skeleton claims publicly in December 2024. They acknowledged that thousands of such claims exist in the historical record. Their conclusion: all of them are misidentifications or fabrications. All of them, without exception, without a single specimen having been subjected to modern forensic analysis, because not a single specimen remains available for analysis. That is not a scientific conclusion, that is an audit result. And the audit finds the inventory missing. Truth does not stay buried forever. It is simply waiting for the right questions.